Hello, welcome to another edition of the It Depends podcast. I, as always, am your host. My name is Kevin Goldsmith. I am a Chief Technology Officer. I've been a VP of Engineering, a Senior Engineering Manager, Engineering Lead, Developer, everything else in 30 plus years in the technology industry. And I wrote a book, and the book is called It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. And in this podcast, we serialize the audiobook, a new chapter every other week. And on the weeks that the podcast does not appear, there's a newsletter which serializes the text of the book. And that is out of order. This podcast is in order, so you can subscribe to both and get different content each week. Thanks again to those who have filled out the survey. If you haven't had a chance to do it, I would really appreciate it. You can find links in the show notes, and you can also find links on itdependsbook.net. That is where you can get more information about the book, links to buy it. It's available in hardcover, softcover, ebook, and audiobook worldwide. There's also a link if you want to contact me, if you have questions or comments. But you can just send an email to contact@itdependsbook.net, and I will reply. This episode, we're covering chapter 31 of the book, Changing Hiring Practices to Build a More Diverse Technology Organization. And this is another chapter about my time at Avvo. In the last episode, we talked about how startups have a huge opportunity to build diverse teams relative to larger companies just through the law of small numbers. And I've been asked often by other startup leaders who are interested in building more diverse teams, well, how do we do it? That's what this chapter is about. And it's specifically about how we did it at Avvo. And we had a tremendous benefit at Avvo in that we were growing quickly. As I say in this chapter, the team grew by 50% over 2 years. So we were scale up, which made it a lot easier. This chapter is all about hiring and reducing bias and making the hiring practice itself more equitable as a way of encouraging and developing diversity in your hiring. Or better yet, not excluding people from your hiring pipeline that are talented. It's not about lowering the bar. There's no talk of lowering the bar in here. It's really just talking about reducing the things that eliminate folks and reduce diversity in your hiring pipelines so that more underrepresented people get through. When people have done those practices to recognize bias and reduce it in their hiring practices, they build more diverse teams. The problem is, and the reason why we don't have more diverse teams everywhere, is because folks aren't really interested in reducing bias generally. I hear this and I see it on LinkedIn or wherever, where people lean into their bias or use their bias as evidence of their hiring acumen, where you'll see somebody say, when a candidate does this, it's an automatic red flag. And that thing is a very minor thing. And oftentimes it is a very minor thing that is indicative of a larger bias. Or people will very proudly say, well, I only hire from the following universities. I say this as a graduate of the computer science department of Carnegie Mellon University, which is, depending on the year, number 1, number 2, or number 3 best computer science programs in the world. So yeah, no, I did that. I went to that school, produces a lot of good people, no doubt. But some of the best developers I've ever hired, and I've hired from CMU, Princeton, Berkeley, Stanford, Harvard, Brown. I've hired from all those top tier schools, but some of the best employees I've ever hired came from schools you've never heard of. And they were just really talented and either had to stay close to home for particular reasons, so they couldn't go to one of those schools. Or, you know what, they just didn't get into one of those schools, but that doesn't mean that they weren't talented. Or they just work super hard because they just love what they do. I don't know. There's lots of reasons why they didn't go to those schools, but they were better than a lot of the people I hired who did. And it's no diss on those schools and no diss on the people that went to them. It just is that those aren't the only places where good people go. Good people go to all sorts of schools. And if you only hire from those schools, you're losing out on tons of great people. And so people like to find the things that make it easier to hire. I'm going to eliminate this group of people, or I'm going to eliminate that group of people. So I only have to look at a smaller group of people. What I have done in every hiring program that I've been responsible for is to say, no, we're going to assume that good people come from anywhere, number one. Number two, we're going to systematically eliminate the things in our hiring pipeline that exclude people for stupid reasons. And by the way, like right now, as I've talked about in prior episodes, it's an employer's market. A lot of people getting laid off, a lot of good people getting laid off from great companies, a lot of talented people looking for work, a lot more people looking maybe even than jobs that are available right now. So it's an employer's market, which means employers can be jerks. Employers can say, you need to do all this work before we'll even talk to you. And a lot of hiring managers feel very comfortable doing that because maybe that was done to them, or maybe because they're looking to reduce the number of people they have to talk to. And so by placing roadblocks in the path, and they want to make sure people really want to work for their company or whatever, they're trying to reduce their own work. But really what that does is exclude a lot of good people. And that's not what we do. It's not what we do at any company I work at. We don't create artificial things to reduce the number of applicants. Yes, we get overwhelmed. Yes, we have ways to narrow that pool down, no doubt, because frankly, we have openings now and we get way more inbound than we can honestly talk to. But we don't look for, did you go to this school? Did you go to that school? Whatever, right? We don't say, oh, you've got to do this amount of homework before we'll even talk to you, because that's not fair. That's not fair. Not everyone can do homework. And I talk about the homework thing in the chapter, so I'm not going to go into it here. But if you are looking to build a diverse team, if you care, and in the last episode, I gave you lots of reasons to care, but in the end, it just comes down to, hey, guess what? Diverse teams do better. Plenty of research, not hard to find, right? Diverse teams do better. So you want that. You do want that. That's a desirable thing. How do you get it? That's always the question. When you're hiring, when you're growing quickly, it's easier. You put more emphasis on your hiring pipeline and not excluding candidates who are from underrepresented backgrounds. And this chapter gives you a lot of ideas on how to do your job to increase that percentage of your hiring pipeline, and you're hiring a bunch. Guess what? You will build a more diverse team. Realistically, these days, though, there's not a lot of scale-ups. It is currently not what a lot of companies are doing. There's just not a lot of scale-ups. To be fair, makes it a lot harder. Doesn't make it impossible, just makes it harder. But in the end, if you don't have a diverse team today, the only way to build a diverse team is to hire. You can't take an existing team and make it more diverse without hiring. So it just means it takes longer. That's all it means. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that it's going to take longer. In the chapter, I describe the process we use, and we dramatically increase the amount of diversity in our team in a relatively short time. Again, easy when you're increasing the size of the team by like 50%. But if you're only increasing the team by 5% year on year, you can still get there. You're just going to have to take your time. It's just going to take longer. But it all comes down to your hiring process and how you do not exclude talented, qualified candidates who come from a different background, maybe than your current team. And that's what this chapter is about, how to do that. There's a whole other part, which is once you do that, how do you maintain it? How do you support those people? Getting to that percentage is a big step, right? There's a whole other thing on how do you maintain it? How do you make sure those folks are supported? But I'm assuming for the moment that all of you listening to this, whether you're a current manager or an aspiring manager, want to take care of the people that work for you, like have a desire to train and help them grow. And if that's the case, and you are doing that for everyone, not just for some of the team, guess what? It's going to happen. The important part is being fair. Being fair. Being fair on how you hire, and then being fair on how you mentor, being fair on how you promote. And if you do that, you are being supportive. You are doing the right thing. That's the core. And to be honest, I think that's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about building diverse teams, but also bringing in and supporting underrepresented groups. Because to me, what it feels like is that we have been unfair in the industry. We have been unfair. We have systematically, through our biases, through our choices, we have taken away opportunity from people for no particularly good reason. And that to me seems very unfair. And I don't like that. And I don't like being part of an industry that is built that way. What makes me so sad about this industry I've given my life to is that it seems like we are now choosing to go out of our way to be unfair. And that is, again, why at this time, these aren't new chapters. I wrote these a while ago, but why I'm feel very strongly about sharing them again, because I'm hoping that out there's a bunch of people, bunch of leaders or future leaders that feel at least somewhat the way I do, because I want our industry to be a good place for all people to work, a good place for all people to have opportunity. We have been growing and growing and growing for years and years and years, and we did it in not the best ways. And then we, at least a lot of us, tried to do it in a much better way. And I don't want to see us go back. I want this industry to be a place I am proud of working, a place that is inclusive, or at least has strong pockets of good companies that care about this stuff the way I care about it. And so that's why I'm still talking about this stuff. I'm very happy in the time we're in right now to be reintroducing these things I wrote a few years ago about this, when back then people were thinking about how do we do this better, and I was trying to give some advice. Now I'm saying it where a lot of companies are stepping away from that. I'm saying, let's build companies that are good at this. And you know what? Maybe we'll be able to change the industry as we all continue to grow. So without further ado, I give you chapter 31 of It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership, 2012 to 2022, Changing Hiring Practices to Build a More Diverse Technology Organization. Changing Hiring Practices to Build a More Diverse Technology Organization, a case study from Avvo. Originally published on June 12, 2020. Introduction. I was the Chief Technology Officer at Avvo from 2016 until 2018 when the company was acquired. Building a more diverse and inclusive technology team was one of the proudest achievements of my tenure there. Given current events, I hear from friends at tech companies that they are reevaluating their lack of diversity. They want to improve. While companies have tried different tactics for years, we haven't made much progress as an industry. It is daunting if you are trying to address diversity for the first time. It is easy to try some things, make no progress, and then give up. This chapter isn't a prescription for improving diversity at any technology company. It is a case study of how we grew diversity at Avvo. The different strategies we employed may be helpful for your efforts. They may inspire you to try new things appropriate for your company and culture. Starting point. Avvo is an online legal marketplace connecting consumers and attorneys in the U.S. The company overall was reasonably diverse from both a gender and race perspective. When I joined in 2016, the technology team was a very different story. The technology organization was not very diverse at the start of my tenure. Additionally, there was no one from any underrepresented groups with management responsibilities in the technology team. The team's status quo was not the result of overt discrimination, but it did demonstrate a lack of prioritization of diversity, inclusion, and reducing unconscious bias. My vision for the company was to make it an exemplar of diversity and inclusion within the region. I wanted to not only make Avvo's technology team diverse to prove that it was possible, but I also wanted to show that a diverse group is more than capable. I additionally believe that we could use our diversity as part of our employer branding, helping us stand out in a crowded talent market. Making improving diversity a priority for technology. I set the tone I intended to take as part of my interview process for the Chief Technology Officer role. I didn't want any potential for disputes between the rest of the senior leadership and myself. Once I had accepted the job, I had a multi-month notice period with my former company. I used the time to talk to the Director of Engineering and Head of Recruiting to prioritize diversity in hiring, set expectations, and start building a better pipeline. Building a coalition and setting expectations. If you are working to build a more diverse team, you must get recruiting as your partners in on the effort. While it may seem natural, it is not. Recruiting, especially external recruiters, are incentivized or measured on their ability to close roles as quickly as possible. Most recruiters I have worked with are delighted to help find diverse candidates, but it is critical to let them know you understand that it means it will take the whole process longer. It is also essential that their managers understand this. If you have hiring managers reporting to you, you need to get them on board and excited about this effort as well. One measure of a manager is their ability to hire well. Being serious about diversity will likely mean they will take longer to fill roles for their team. You may need to assure them you will consider this if they miss their KPIs or key performance indicators. You cannot set up or hold conflicting goals for your managers. You will likely fail at both if you cannot prioritize building diverse teams over hitting KPIs. One way to handle the increased hiring time is to start sourcing for a role much earlier than scheduled. Spend the time before the position is scheduled to open only looking at underrepresented candidates. Create an agreement with your manager that you can hire ahead of schedule if you find a suitable candidate early. If you reach the planned opening date for the role and haven't located anyone, you can open the pool to your normal channels without losing time. Your manager will also need to understand the potential impact of a diversity hiring focus on your KPIs. With your manager's support, create a reasonable KPI or OKR as your goal to track your efforts. The OKR should give you a target and some cover if there are challenges to some of the trade-offs you may need to make because you are hiring more slowly. Share your goal with your team. Update them on your progress regularly. Transparency is essential, but also helps to enlist the rest of your team to do their part to help achieve the goal. At Avvo, my diversity goals were part of my OKRs. I shared our progress with a monthly update to the organization. This repeated communication demonstrated the level of importance I placed on this goal and showed our improvement in real time. The good news is that as you progress towards your goal, your time to hire will come down while maintaining or increasing your diversity. It does get easier. You will soon stop making trade-offs as you continue to improve. Fixing the hiring process. When I joined Avo, the hiring process involved multiple pre-interviews, a do-at-home coding challenge, a review meeting, an in-person interview loop, and a follow-up meeting. The process may have taken a single candidate over a month to get from the recruiter's first email to an offer. Even without considering diversity, it was not an efficient process for a company that wanted to grow. The Avo process kept inappropriate candidates out by design. It did not find appropriate candidates, however. In machine learning parlance, the false rejection rate was too high to avoid raising the false acceptance rate. If you are trying to screen out, you miss a lot of good people. Often, biases are part of the filters. Those biases reinforce the lack of diversity. The current process's state gave me a license to make some drastic changes. I had the support of the recruiting team and many of the managers. They all had stories of losing good candidates because of the length of the process. Some employees and managers defended the status quo hiring process as required to maintain the quality of the development team. Luckily, there were few of them. After listening to their position and having a good discussion, I decided to move forward knowing that I had the support of most of the group. Removing the coding challenge. Many companies believe the at-home coding challenge is critical to establishing a candidate's bona fides before investing too much time in them. Many sources discuss the problems with coding challenges from a diversity perspective. The arguments against the practice that resonated with me were the following. Candidates often take much longer than companies expect them to complete. The Avo guidance was that the candidate should spend no more than 2 hours on the challenge. One candidate estimated that he spent 12 hours on it. He wanted to make sure that he did well. A coding challenge is unpaid labor with no value for the results. The demand sends a message that the company places no worth on the candidate's time. I do know that some companies pay candidates a nominal fee for completing the challenge. I encourage this, but eliminating the challenge also solves the problem. Not all candidates have sufficient time to work on coding challenges. If a candidate is on a job search, they may get challenges from multiple companies, each with an expectation of hours of work. A candidate may already work at a stressful job or multiple jobs. They may be a caretaker to children or other relatives or have a long commute so that they can live in an affordable home. The candidate may have other issues that require their time. The challenge can be an unreasonable burden for those people. A coding challenge requires that the candidate have the equipment and connectivity to complete the project. This requirement may not seem like an unreasonable expectation for a software developer, but not every developer may have the economic or personal safety to make this happen. The combination of all the above creates a bias towards people who do not have a significant constraint on their time and finances. Those biases reinforce and perpetuate the lack of diversity in the industry. As part of the hiring process, it is still critical to understand a candidate's technical maturity. We replace the coding challenge with multiple in-person challenges during the interview loop described later in this chapter. To not overwhelm our interviewers, we focused on ensuring that the recruiter and hiring manager screens established a high culture and technical bar. This expectation on the screening required training the hiring managers on questions to ask for candidates at different levels. As we got comfortable with this process, the new screening process achieved equivalent success in identifying candidates while increasing diversity in the candidate pool and significantly decreasing the time to hire. The interview loop. There are many articles on reducing bias in the interview loop. We combined the ideas that we felt resonated the best with our culture and some of the best ideas I'd experienced from prior companies. Interview training. We required that anyone participating in the interview loop participate in 2 training sessions. An overall interview training that myself and the head of recruiting for my team presented. This training included much of the standard content of a traditional interview training effort. We added implicit bias training led by someone from Ada Developer Academy, a Seattle developer training program focused on women and gender diverse people. We had previously hired interns from Ada, and their mentors were required to take this course. It was so valuable that we made a deal with Ada to occasionally present that class at AVO to help with our interviewer training. We also required that anyone participating in interviews became qualified on the interview questions. A group of developers for each of the different disciplines got together to create 2 or 3 technical problems to solve, reflective of the work they did every day. Each question had a set of representative answers in a 3x3 grid. One axis represented the candidate's experience level, the other axis was unacceptable, acceptable, and excellent solutions. We asked the same questions to any candidate regardless of their role level or their experience level. Over time, we added to the set of representative answers as we heard new answers from candidates. To train on the question, ideally the interviewer would attempt to answer the problem themselves. Then they would observe a trained interviewer working with a candidate on the challenge twice. Then a trained interviewer would watch them working with a candidate on the questions themselves. Only once the person completed all those steps could the person interview candidates. Any trained interviewer could interview for any team hiring for a role in that discipline. There was no job level required for an interviewer. The interview panel. We ensured that at least one person from an underrepresented group was on any interviewing panel. This requirement was challenging at first. Some of the interviewers ended up having many interviews to do. We felt it was important for 2 reasons. If we were interviewing someone from an underrepresented group, they would see someone like themselves and be able to ask questions, if they wanted, about their experience. If we were interviewing someone not from an underrepresented group, we would potentially catch any red flags indicating they might have challenges in a diverse environment. This practice turned out to be very valuable. The interviews. As the interview training period required shadowing, almost every interview would have 2 people from the panel. One person worked with the candidate and one observed the discussion. This pairing meant that the hiring manager got 2 interpretations of what happened in the meeting and how the candidate responded to different questions. Multiple perspectives were beneficial in reducing the effect of any interviewer's biases. We offered to let the candidates bring their tools if they chose so that they could be comfortable rather than presenting the candidates with an abstract problem and having them solve it on a whiteboard or a company laptop. The interviewer and the candidate solved the technical challenges collaboratively. This approach mirrored the way that many teams at AVO worked in a pair programming style. The goal was to recreate, as much as possible, the actual working environment of our teams. Gaining credibility as an inclusive technology employer. Improving our interview process alone wouldn't make a significant difference if AVO was not visible in the market as a company serious about diversity and inclusion. The team already had multiple people volunteering at the Ada Developers Academy, but had never hired an intern. We hired our first 2 interns from Ada in their next cohort. We followed that by joining the new Washington Technology Industry Association Apprenti program, a registered technical apprentice program focusing on underrepresented groups and veterans. We hired 2 apprentices from the first cohort of that program as well. We always hired interns and apprentices in pairs to ensure that they would have someone else going through a similar experience that they could use for mutual support in addition to their AVO mentors. Working with these programs let us partner with people deeply enmeshed in the community. We wanted to learn and listen. Working with Ada and Apprenti also introduced us to their volunteers, often experienced developers from other companies who felt strongly about increasing representation in technology. Along with our partnership with training programs, we ensured we attended the local meetups for underrepresented groups. One of our recruiters, engineering managers, developers, or I would attend these meetings to listen and understand the challenges these groups in the industry faced. We networked as well, but only tentatively at first. We wanted to establish credibility and not just come to a single meeting and disappear. The sustained efforts to become a part of the community taught us a lot and raised awareness of what we were trying to do at AVO. Candidates would apply and mention the people they'd already met at the company. AVO was already hosting meetups for different technologies. Those meetings eventually became more diverse as candidates from underrepresented groups visited to see our offices. Evolving the culture. The focus on increasing diversity did not have universal support. When I joined, the technology team culture was not very inclusive, and some were resistant to making any changes. I continued to educate and discuss, but I also pushed firmly forward. Our Agile coaches and I taught new, more inclusive facilitation techniques for meetings and discussions. One of the senior managers started a mentoring program for everyone in the organization, designed to support all, but especially those who might feel imposter syndrome. Eventually, those not interested in the new culture decided to find other opportunities. In the end, this was a relatively small percentage of the team. Most were interested in being part of the new culture. The results. In under 2 years, we increased the percentage of women in the technology team from 17% to 27%. We increased the share of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial people from 2% to 11%. Our age diversity also improved significantly. We did this while increasing the size of the team by nearly 50%. We also significantly improved our employee net promoter scores during this time. If one thing stands out to me about what we accomplished, it is a question asked by one of our developers right after the acquisition. The acquiring company's executive team hosted a town hall to answer questions from their new employees. An Avo developer asked, "We are very proud of the diversity of our technology team at Avo. What efforts have you put in place to make sure that your team is diverse?" Acknowledgements. There are several people mentioned in this article by title. I want to acknowledge them here as this was always a team effort and would not have succeeded without their involvement and leadership. Specifically, Laquita Hester, a fantastic recruiter dedicated to improving diversity in the technology industry. Hunter Davis, Director of Engineering and the creator and guide of our mentoring program. Justin Weiss, Director of Engineering, and Leslie Zaviska, Engineering Manager. Many, many others were instrumental in ways large and small. Every developer, tester, data scientist, and manager helped. I also want to acknowledge my manager and executive team peers who had built an excellent company and supported me as I brought my team up to a level of diversity closer to what they had created. The executive team consisted of Mark Britton, Eric Dahlberg, Monica Williams, Bhavani Murugaya, Sachin Bhatia, Kelly McGill, and Jason Moss. Hey everyone, I hope you found that chapter helpful. I hope it gave you some ideas about ways you can improve your hiring practices. Again, even if you just do the work to kind of reduce some of the systematic biases, maybe that were unintentionally put into your system because it was the way you got hired or it's the way companies have done it traditionally. And now with different eyes, you can look at it and say, you know what, actually, maybe we could do this in a better way, a more inclusive way. Hopefully that'll help you to improve your hiring practices. And by improving your hiring practices, reducing bias, you'll just end up with a more diverse team. You still got to work at it, but at least if that's the first step. I want to say I haven't talked about it in this podcast, but I was supposed to speak at Mobile World Congress in a couple weeks. Unfortunately, for family reasons, I am not able to do that. I haven't talked about it on the podcast, so you're probably unaware of it, but I do know that they were listing my talk and listing my name. And so I'm very bummed about it. I was really excited about it, but unfortunately, I won't be able to do that talk. I do have another talk lined up locally in Seattle, and I'll talk more about that as the date is confirmed, and you'll hear about that maybe in the next podcast. You'll see it in the newsletter, or you can see it from my website. But yeah, I'm really bummed about it. There's other talks I'm lining up for later this year. So even if you're not in Seattle, I am hoping to give talks in other cities. So again, sorry about that. Please check out itdependsbook.net with information about the book, where you can buy it, all that kind of stuff. Also, how to contact me, how to sign up for the newsletter is there. And stay tuned to the next few podcasts because we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the book. And I'm going to do some special stuff related to that. And so, keep your ears peeled or your eyes peeled, depending on whether you're looking at the newsletter or listening to this podcast. I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you 2 weeks back here on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.